Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special episode of Uncanny Treks. We are starting our coverage of Season 2 of X-Men 97. We got 3 whole episodes to talk about, Matt. 3 whole episodes. I'm Bob in Cascadia. That's Matt in the Southland. Matt, how you doing this evening?
Bob, I am hyped up because we are in X-Men 97 Season 2, which makes us technically X-Men Season,
There were 5 seasons of the 92. I think that's right.
no one's ever done a podcast to cover any of that information. We should probably look into that.
Yeah, no one would ever bother to do a podcast about 7 seasons of an X-Men cartoon, Matt. That's insane. Why would
No,
anyone
no,
ever do that? And
must be
certainly,
too.
they wouldn't put it behind a paywall and compare it to an even more obscure cartoon called Young Justice.
And would they even not really charge anything for those episodes via Patreon?
The most nominal paywall in the world. Is it $1 American?
$1 Bob. $1 and you can listen to 40 episodes of X-Men 92 versus Young Justice.
It's got to be closer to 80, yeah?
It's some crazy amount, Bob. Very crazy amount of episodes. We go episode by episode, analyze it, do our little talking like we're about to with X-Men 97 Season 2.
Let's get into it with episode 1, Matt. It's Days of Past Future. And I wanted to begin, Matt, by asking, how much did you laugh when we have Bishop saying, apologize to time later, or we have to get the X-Men back to the 90s?
The way he says it, Bob, we have to get the X-Men back to the 90s. And I want to put on my sunglasses and be, oh yeah, take me back to the 90s, baby.
It was a hilarious line, and it also became a motif throughout these 3 episodes, especially this one and the third one. A couple characters, I didn't take a note of every time a character referenced it, but characters reference the 90s an awful lot in episode 1 and episode 3.
Yeah, it really wants the viewer to know that this setting is meant to be taking place in the 90s. Hopefully it's not just the MCU nudging people to make them aware that this is a different continuity or something.
They didn't do that nearly as much in season 1.
Oh, no, no.
Yeah. Granted, the style of this is, of course, very 90s, and there's a lot of 90s nostalgia, but I don't think there was so many explicit dialogue flags in season 1 that, oh, we are in the 90s.
Especially when you have 3 different time periods to travel to in this season. Another thing, too, I wanted to flag at the beginning of this episode is we have Forge and Bishop interacting, and Forge, Bob, he drops the D-bomb in an animated children's cartoon. He broke the code. Did you know that, Bob?
I did not know that.
This is the Talking Frog Network. This is animated series. No, you can't be dropping that. This is the first instance in this long-running animated series that we've heard a curse word. And it was Forge.
Not only does he invent all this great time travel technology, Matt, he invented the use of the word that's a curse word in this.
He did, Bob. It was never used prior to the 90s. Thank you, Forge.
Well, Matt, we're going to talk a lot about a spotlight episode for Jubilee in episode 2. But in a weird way, episode 1 is a little bit of a spotlight episode for Forge, right?
Forge all over the place, dropping in and out. And when he gets to the future, he gets into a shootout with some robots. And I've never seen Forge in that kind of role before, really, in an animated form. In the comics, yes.
Even in the comics, it's pretty rare. I know there's sometimes when Forge takes us in the comics, especially when he's on the substitute X-Men in the late 80s with, I think it's Banshee and Strong Guy and Legion. But yeah, you usually see Forge in more of an Oracle type role or more in a Cube type role because he's inventing technology, right? So I don't think we've ever seen Forge in live action or animation be so violent, and I can't think of a lot of times in comics either where we see him take up the gun, despite the fact that Vietnam was initially a big part of his backstory.
Having a non-combat mutant power seems to not be as fun if you are an X-Men.
I'm going to tease again to our discussion of episode 2, where I have a question about if somebody doesn't have a non-combat mutant power, but we will save that till episode 2.
In the beginning of the episode, did you remember that Wolverine has lost his adamantium skeleton?
I did remember that Magneto did fatal attractions on Wolverine. I forgot to look for the bone claws.
Both times he uses them, it implies that they shatter or splinter or break, and it's painful for him to hit things with them. I didn't read a lot of comics where he had the bone claws. I appreciate the detail here, though, in that they show that anytime he's hitting somebody, that, especially a metal robot, it's shattering or breaking it. That'd be that seems rough for Wolverine. Feel for the man. Although I do dig his new costume.
It is a cool costume.
Also, the idea, too, that it could take time for them to heal over, so he has limited use of them until they heal back. That's a cool caveat to the claws.
Matt, did you get excited when Apocalypse's final horseman showed up? Were you, yes, I know those guys from Rick Remender's Uncanny
I,
X-Force?
I was, Bob. They showed up in the trailer. I think it was the second trailer, maybe. And I was, I know these guys. They're weird. But I know them. Oh, yeah. Remender's X-Force, Uncanny X-Force.
Wouldn't let Matt go down identifying them in the notes because there's no point, because you can say they're Rick Remender's final horsemen, and that explains it.
So you didn't want me to describe in detail what each horseman, who he is or she is, and what their powers are, and maybe what their actual names are? You don't want that information, Bob?
I don't really think it's useful information, Matt, despite the fact that I'm going to read off about 20 names of cameos from episode 2. No, in the same way that I don't think we need to run down the X Factor lineup, because the X Factor lineup is familiar.
So what you're saying, Bob, is that most of our listeners probably are already familiar enough with these characters that we don't need to tell them who they are. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And if they're not, I would just say to them, I don't think us reading their names will help. I would just say, go read Rick Remender's Uncanny X-Force. It's a good series. Matt and I will get to covering it eventually.
But what if some dude, Bob, is listening to our podcast and he's, hey, that drummer boy, that drummer dude, what's the deal with him? And I could say, apparently his drums cause cancer.
Is he Pestilence? I think he's Pestilence.
I don't know, Bob. I had it in the notes, but somebody got rid of it. And also, Bob, Dazzler have similar power to the Dazzler. It's a male Dazzler with a drum.
That's very special, Matt.
You're welcome for that little tidbit, Bob.
I don't believe the Dazzler tidbit was an option I deleted. But
Literally a Civil War soldier, drummer boy, Dazzler. I would love for them to have a fight, or if they started their own band. How cool would that be?
he shows up in a Union outfit, but he's a Confederate in disguise as a Union drummer. That's his backstory. He's a Reb pretending to be a Yankee.
Well, all right, we'll see that we've learned a lot about that guy. Another character, Bob, I want to point out, too. His name was Ozymandias. Is that Apocalypse's Desaad? Is that my understanding?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I would describe him as Apocalypse's hype man. You might compare him to, I can't remember the guy's name, but the member of the Obsidian Order in the Avengers movies for Thanos. And compare him to that guy. Or you might also compare him to, I think he's called the Herald in the Dune movies. Or you might compare him to Silver Surfer as Galactus's Herald. So usually, as I understand it, Ozymandias is number one guy, but he's not a member of the Horsemen. I think he maybe first showed up in the 90s and some of the late 90s Apocalypse crossover stuff. Another character thing I wanted to hit you with, Matt. So what did you like more? Did you like when Morph gives us a little Thor cameo? Or did you like when we see the origin of Cable's love of big guns, when Kid Cable picks up a big gun for the first time?
My favorite scene of the two, Bob, was when Cable goes for the gun, because he picks up the part of one of the robot's arm cannons, and you don't know what he's doing with it at first. As someone who knows Cable for so long, when you see it, you're like, okay, he's going to shoot that, right? Something's going to shoot out of that, right? Because it doesn't look like a gun that he picks up. Then it cuts to Scott and Jean's face. That's the best part. And you've got the X-Men music played in the background, the main theme. You see it fire, and what fires out of it looks like Scott's optic blast. Yeah. After his eye lights up too. So you're okay. They're trying to make sure we understand the connection, that this is Scott and Jean's kid. Love the scene.
One other Cable detail, Matt, that I did want to flag from how this episode handles Cable is one of my least favorite things about Cable, and I have many least favorite things about Cable, but one of my least favorite things about Cable is in the late 90s, there's a Caleb Cable Storm romance. And this portrayal of the Cable rules out the possibility of him having a romance with Storm, because we have Storm meeting Cable as a teenager. So that rules out the possibility in the late 90s that they will have a romance. And that makes me happy. That's ruled out.
But later on, there's an implied potential romance that I thought was even funnier. We'll get to that in the next episode.
All right. The last thing I wanted to say before we do characters of the episode, Matt, was, and granted, this will lead us into episode 2, but it was a bit surprising with it being a big moment that the end of this is X-Force recruiting Jubilee and Sunspot. I was a little surprised that they let our tie-in comic, X-Men 97, spoil that a bit.
They just assumed most people were going to be reading that as...
X-Force was so all over the trailer.
You would have had to have known that some of those characters were going to appear, although it ruined the lineup, because I would have liked to have seen it organically be created without knowing ahead of time who was going to be on the team. That is the only thing. At the same time, it made me want to watch it more. Strategically, they probably made the better bet. Although I don't think as many people read the tie-in comic and knew the whole full-blown story, which we'll get more into in this next episode.
So who was your character of the episode for episode 1, Matt, for Days of Past Future?
Bob, Cyclops is my character of the episode because of his awesome costume. It's the blue one with the white X that goes down the sides.
It's his X Factor costume, but it's under a jacket.
There's something, it looks so much better without the hood piece and with the top of it covered with an extra part. Great job on that design. All right, his parenting was phenomenal in this episode. This is trying to meet the demographic of fathers who grew up with X-Men and are now having their kids watch it. Had they done this story when we were younger, we would have been bored out of our minds. But me watching it, and I'm like, okay, I see where they're going for here. They got a lot of people that are now dads watching this show, and they're trying to make sure they can relate to Cyclops and the Cable stuff going on.
Very similar to our coverage of Star Trek Prodigy. When I was reading Reddit about responses to these episodes, there was a lot of people talking about watching kids.
Yep. And then there's creative use of his optic blast throughout this. I love seeing Cyclops using his blast to force himself into certain moves and movement.
To put it a different way, he uses it to propel him as a means of movement, right?
Correct. Yeah, he propels himself around via his optic blast, which is cool because it reminds people that it's not a laser beam coming out of his eyes. It's concussive force.
It's not something highlighted very often.
And back in the day, Bob, you never had a problem with that, but I do. And I still have a problem with that because when people confuse it with laser beam, it's a problem. It's not a good thing.
I'm fine with thinking of it as lasers, probably because I thought of it as lasers when I was.
It bugs the hell out of me. It's not lasers. So stop it, Bob.
Not going to, bro. Not going to.
Who was your favorite character, Bob?
My favorite character this episode was Forge. For the reasons we said, it was crazy to see him go full Terminator 2 fighting the Terminator robots. That was neat.
You want to talk Terminator? Let's get into some Terminator, Bob, right here in this next episode.
All right. So episode 2, Matt, Force to be reckoned with. I don't remember if in our text messages we called that was going to be the X-Force episode, but it's totally the X-Force episode. Right down to them doing a full-on X-Force 97 intro. I stood up and pumped my fist when they did the X-Force 97 intro. I'm not going to lie. The only complaint I had about it, or this wasn't even a complaint, it was the way they teased me. You know how they put the X Factor into the X-Force 97 intro?
Yes.
And I was a little afraid that at the climax of the intro, when you have the good guy team run into the bad guy team, I was a little afraid they were going to have X-Force run into X Factor. And they didn't do that. They put some Apocalypse minions as the bad guys instead. And as somebody who likes this episode and likes what they're doing with X-Force, but is, on the one hand, I see why they're treating X Factor the way they are. I am a little skittish by how bad and how villainous they're making X Factor, but it gave me a little bit of relief that they didn't fully put X Factor into the villainous role. It makes total sense to treat X Factor this way, given that they do work for the government, given that 90s X Factor comics do sometimes wrestle with the idea of how much is the government X Factor leading into the Days of Future Past. Nonetheless, I like all the X Factor characters, and I don't like them being fascist.
It's a bit of a double-edged sword there, Bob, because you got to have some bad guys here, and the bad guys are definitely X Factor. And they're lame bad guys too, Bob.
For sure. And Havoc is such a goof in this and such a thug. Another interesting set of layers is you had a lot of characters, just as you had a lot of characters across these episodes talking about the 90s, Matt, you had a lot of characters talking about authority. Specifically, you have Cable saying, "We are the authority," and Polaris later telling Jubilee, I think both these characters are saying this to Jubilee, Polaris saying to Jubilee, it's about authority. Obviously, there's the thematic point of that, right? But it's also funny because it did a little bit feel a backhanded reference to the 90s and early aughts Wildstorm comic, The Authority, with the dystopian superhero team. So I just thought that was interesting that you're getting a very mild, that could be taken in another way too, but a very mild call out to a DC comic in this.
Bob, we did not have a mild call out to a certain character who made her second appearance in the X-Men 97 run. I don't think she made too many appearances in the original 92 Phoenix Saga.
She was around in maybe one other episode. I don't remember what it was, though. As somebody who's been protective of Emma Frost, because I love Emma Frost as a leader of Generation X, and I love Emma Frost in the Morrison X-Men run, I was a little hostile to things that the season 1 showrunner said about Emma Frost on social media. I also don't love how villainously Emma Frost comes across in this season. But I do have to say they're doing it well. They're making her very horny for Cable, which is really funny given that's Scott's son. Very funny.
That's what I was referring to earlier. It's so funny, man, that she's hitting on the son of the guy that she has this huge fling with in the comics.
When we say that, it sounds creepy, and it is creepy, but it's also the fact that she's hitting on this guy who's old enough to be her father, but is the son of a man she has a crush on, which I believe there are some gestures to Emma having a crush on Scott in season 1 of the show.
They are not going to explore that in X-Men 97. They don't have time for that.
I don't know, man. By the time they get to season 4, they might need some material.
I don't know. You would have to really bulldoze the entire Jean Grey thing again to do that, and I don't think they're going to allow that to happen.
The writers of this show seem to be too much huge Jean Grey fans. But the thing that made it a lot more likely for Emma Frost to become so prominent in X-Men comics in the 2000s and the 2010s was that Jean was dead for most of those decades.
See, Jean would have to die again. That's not going to happen.
On the other hand, most of the Grant Morrison run that we covered is both Jean and Emma on the team and somewhat catfighting. They could still do an Emma face turn and just have her and Jean squabbling on the team.
It's 2 or 3 seasons worth of stuff, though, if that happens.
I don't know, man. I think we might, since we know we're getting at least 4 seasons of this, right?
Where else did we see Emma Frost before, though?
Oh, yeah. So the one other point about Emma I wanted to make is I did feel the portrayal of Emma took a lot of influence from the failed X-Men pilot, Pride of the X-Men. This is a treacherous, untrustworthy Emma Frost, more so than you would see in the 21st century or the 90s comics.
With the exception of she did not shoot or throw her psychic spear. Needed a psychic spear.
I would be down with Emma using a psychic spear in this. That could be fun. How did you feel about the portrayal of Psylocke, Matt? She's the major character here, although maybe Major's overselling it, but she's the prominent character here that we've seen the least of, either in the prior season or in X-Men 92.
Yeah, we only saw a one-frame cameo of her in the original run. Going into Psylocke, she's such a complicated character with a complicated origin, in my opinion. I've made that clear as we've gone through in this podcast before that I just don't care. And I appreciate what they did here. Just judging by what they show here, she shows this telepathy with purple butterflies. Cool. Good with that. Okay. She has some psychic knives that come out of her hands. She's got a British accent. She's drawn to look Japanese, correct?
Yes.
And she has purple hair.
Yes.
And that's it. They didn't go into any explanation, nothing. She's just there. That's the Psylocke we have. And I'm good with that.
In a slight contrast from Matt, I care about Psylocke a lot. I like Psylocke a lot, but I do agree with Matt. I think Matt's perfectly correct that the show probably doesn't need to wrestle with Psylocke's origins. I don't know if anything good is going to come from that.
Nothing interesting would come of it, I can tell you that. So they made the right spot. She's a quick ninja, she's got cool powers, and she's a mean Jean Grey. But not Phoenix level mean Jean Grey, just cutthroat.
I do think it's maybe somewhat unfortunate. I like how Krakoa era X-Men had both the original character of Betsy Braddock as Psylocke, then also Kwannon, the woman whose body Psylocke took over in the 90s or the late 80s. And it managed to make both Kwannon and Psylocke, or Kwannon and Betsy Braddock, characters. I like that, but that might be asking too much of the show to pull off. I did think the show pulled off well, Matt, was we have a big X Factor X-Force fight here, and they did cool pairings based on powers. So we see Archangel fight Polaris, which obviously doesn't go well for Archangel.
It really doesn't. The darts that he shoots from his wings being magnetically charged and shot back at him. Oh man, that was awesome. That was brilliant.
Then we get a fun little exchange between the two big guys. So Cable versus Strong Guy, and get a fun little inversion of Untouchables where Strong Guys, he shouldn't have brought a gun to a fist fight. Then Psylocke versus Jamie Madrox is very fun, right?
She was taking out a bunch of different dudes coming at her. It was cool.
It was a good excuse, like you're saying, for Psylocke to show off her ninja skills, right? And then we get the energy blasters to have a big fight. So we have Havoc fighting both Sunspot and Jubilee. So that was a fun little paired matchup. And even though this episode seems to be dedicated to making Havoc look like a total tool, it does make him come off pretty competent, even if he is trying to beat up two teenagers.
He seems more like government leader.
He's evil Cyclops. The one thing I was going to mildly complain is Wolfsbane. She's a member of X Factor. She was a member of New Mutants before X Factor. But poor Wolfsbane doesn't get anything to do in this fight scene at all. She just crawls around on the wall.
And the previous episode where we saw X Factor way back in season 3 of the original run, the episode was Cold Comfort. And she gets one punch in that episode.
Oh, funny. So that's a little bit keeping in the tradition.
Yeah, she gets one punch. But the big difference though here is that this version of X Factor from the original episode, this one doesn't have Quicksilver.
I believe we did see Quicksilver's face on that board in the season 1 finale and in the #1 prequel comic. And I believe like Wanda's, maybe I'm misremembering this, but I believe like Wanda's, Pietro's picture said Off-World.
Yep. So there you go.
Since you went back and watched Cold Comfort, which was the X Factor episode of X-Men 92, I had another question because I don't remember Cold Comfort very well. Did they have any sort of relationship between Polaris and Jubilee? Because the way this episode goes, it hinges on a Polaris-Jubilee relationship, which I thought, even though obviously they did meet in that episode, was maybe a little bit the show just reinventing something. And I'm fine with them retconning or inventing something, but I didn't remember there being any Polaris-Jubilee connection before.
So in the episode, Jubilee doesn't have the hots, but she's impressed by Iceman, and he needs to break into this government complex. Jubilee goes along with him. So she's learning all about X Factor and everything from Iceman, and doing that, it shows she researches everything.
Funny that in a way it's almost another romantic triangle of it's Polaris, Iceman, and Jubilee. It's a romantic triangle. It's funny.
The saddest part, the only problem, Bob, I had going back to watch Cold Comfort, especially with Archangel having such a good run here, is that knowing Iceman is dead on Genosha.
He died on Genosha?
What everyone's saying. Yes, they're saying he's dead.
Seems unlikely.
I think it is too. Bob, I want to point out one other thing about this particular scene where we have Jubilee and Havoc together, because Jubilee gets captured by X Factor and Havoc begins interrogating Jubilee. And at this point, Jubilee makes sure to let Havoc know that his team is nothing but a C-list roster. Which, do you agree with that?
I agree with insulting X Factor in this episode because they're behaving like fascist. But in more general terms, no, I think X Factor rules, at least this incarnation of X Factor, and I would not insult them in that way.
Okay, so if you're ranking their members, you wouldn't say they're C-list mutants. They're probably more B-list. Of course, Bob would probably make them A-list, but that's okay. That's Bob. All right. Now, she refers to Havoc as knockoff Cyclops, which is so funny on so many different levels, because in this run, Cyclops does not know that Havoc is his brother.
Oh, yeah.
Jubilee doesn't know that either. But the joke still works because he's the leader of X Factor.
And she just intuits the simile. Matt, is it time for me to read a bunch of cameos at you?
Yeah, Bob, because once Jubilee makes her way into the detention center here, we see a ton of different mutants locked up, and they're all apparently from the runs we just covered on our podcast. So go back and read some of those.
Of the most extensive list I could find, and that's the problem with recording this the day the episode came out, is I couldn't find more authoritative list. But the most authoritative list I found included Nature Girl, Quentin Quire, iBoy, Sync, Artie Maddox, Dust, Monet St. Croix, the Stepford Cuckoos, Chamber, Glob, Pixie, Enole, Wing, Angel Salvador, Beak, who I didn't see, but multiple people insisted they did.
I saw Beak. Beak was there.
You saw Beak? Okay. And Maggie from Marvels, who's the ugly-looking little small mutant child, which apparently a lot of people online were really excited to see Maggie from that 90s Alex Ross comic Marvels. I didn't recognize her, but a lot of people were stoked to see her. I recognize most of those other characters. Not all of them, but most of them. But yeah, I didn't happen to see Beak, and I wouldn't have known who Maggie from Marvels was unless people had made a big deal about it.
Of these characters, Bob, who would you most like to see them flesh out to some degree? I want to go with Quentin Quire, but I think we're both in agreement there. So other than Quentin Quire, who obviously they could do something with, my second choice would be Stepford Cuckoos.
I would also be my second choice. Do you have a number 3 that you want to see?
Dust.
Same for me.
Visually, you could have some creative scenes. And I would love to see a Storm Dust combination type mutant power thing.
I do think we're likely to see good stuff with Dust. Maybe not certain, because she's prominent on that board of photos at the season 1 finale. I am with you on that, Matt. I would say the counterpoint, though, is what I want even more than 1 or 2 of these mutants to be made a big deal out of, is I want to see a Generation X team. So you have the makings of a great Generation X team here. You've got Jubilee already. You've got Sync. You've got Monet St. Croix, you've got Chamber, You've maybe got Mondo. I wasn't sure if that was Mondo or not. I want them to bring in the other couple of missing Generation X characters like Skin, also Husk. But you've got the making of a good Generation X team. If you want to put some different characters on Generation X, that's cool too. But more than anything else, that's actually what I want, is to see a Generation X team.
You had your chance in the 90s, Bob, and they blew it.
Hey man, they didn't blow it. They had a nearly 100-issue series that was mostly pretty good.
I'm talking about their TV movie.
Care if there's a live action Generation X TV series, Matt. I don't need that in my life. All I want is just a good episode. If in season 4 we had a Generation X 97 opening, Matt, I could die happy.
You probably would, Bobby. That would be awesome. Do you think there's a possibility we could see Generation X in the future? Because she does don that uniform in this episode.
She's in the uniform. I have most of the characters there already. I think we're certainly going to see them at least as background characters. I'm just hoping we get an episode where they're a little bit more spotlighted. But I think we're almost sure to see them standing around in the background, maybe even in this season finale.
Well, for sure. A bigger picture question here for you. What are your thoughts on them doing this thing where they're showing X-Force as the Black Ops team that straight up just murders the bad guys? And you have X-Factor as this government-led team. And I guess it's trying to imply that the X-Men is meant to be the balance to this.
That seems to be what they're doing. It's maybe doing X-Factor a little dirty, but it also makes sense given what X-Factor's job is, right? And also given the kind of stupid direction Havoc took in Rick Remender's Uncanny Avengers run, it makes sense why they're doing it. So even though I'm a little grouchy about it, I see why they're doing it, and I'm critical.
I think you just don't like X-Factor on this particular Earth. This incarnation of X-Factor is way more fascist than what you're used to, and that's the issue. Because even in Cold Comfort, it's the same way, Bob. They were bad guys in that one, too. They're literally the bad guys.
I don't care about how they are portrayed in a 30-year-old cartoon where they're in one episode. Whereas when it's an ongoing concern, I feel it a little more. Does that distinction make sense?
It does, Bob. You don't care about the episode when it's actually in the 90s, but when it's set in the 90s and it's 2026, you do.
What it is, I like most of the characters who are on the X Factor team.
Yes.
But I don't like X Factor's purpose.
Gotcha.
And that's the tension that I'm running into. And again, the show is legitimate to emphasize X Factor in the way that. So Matt, all the Jubilee stuff, I maybe found it a little overselling, but it worked and it made Jubilee your character of the episode.
Oh yeah, Bob. Jubilee definitely. That rollerblade martial arts stuff was awesome. You remember the action figure came with rollerblades, which was cool. I wish I still had the action figure so I could recreate the martial arts scenes with it. I didn't do that as a kid. I was just stupid. I could have come up with martial arts rollerblading. She's only second though to Archangel. Archangel was awesome in this as well because he just straight up murders war.
I'm going to go with Psylocke. We've long been hungry for some good Psylocke content. This gave me good Psylocke content, so I was happy. We'll talk about the third episode a little less, but it's Rise of Apocalypse Part 1, Matt. And so I think the question to begin with, the really important question is, who do you think's hotter, young Apocalypse or old Magneto?
Young Apocalypse, Bob. He's got that Prince of Persia look to him.
It's all about the Prince of Persia. Matt, did you at all recognize the name of Kandra, who's basically seems to be an advisor to Rama Tut in this episode?
I had no clue who that was.
So she's one of these like long-lived mutants called Externals, and she's a sponsor of the Thieves Guild. And I think she was originally introduced in the 90s Gambit series. So I don't think she usually in the comics has that tight a link to Apocalypse, but she is an external, and I think Apocalypse is external, or he's warred with the external. So there's some connection, but I don't think she's usually shown as an Apocalypse ally in the comics, is my impression. But the other two guys, Logos, who's the general for Ramatut, and then Ball, who's Hard-Edge Lieutenant, those characters, as well as Apocalypse warring with Ramatut, that's apparently all from the 90s miniseries Rise of Apocalypse, which I've never read. But I did think it was funny that we have these 3 episodes, and one episode is a loose adaptation of the Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix in the future that you read in the 90s. Another is a loose adaptation of X-Force, and the third one is a loose adaptation of Rise of Apocalypse from the 90s. So that they were going to all these X-Men spin-off series for inspiration for these first 3 episodes, I thought was pretty charming for the season.
I was excited to see Rama Tut because we had covered his origin in the Fantastic Four stuff way back with the Kirby.
That was before it was even established initially that Ramatut was Kang. I think that's not until it's where it's established that Ramatut and Kang are the same. But we read the original FF comic.
But there's also ties to Doctor Doom as well within that
Yeah.
time frame.
To ask, do you think they would have gone with Ramatut if the MCU hadn't given up on Kang?
Probably not.
On the
I
one
don't.
hand, I could see them doing it anyway because the Kang Apocalypse or Ramatut Apocalypse rivalry is pretty established in the comics, so it makes sense to do it. But on the other hand, yeah, you wonder if they wouldn't be concerned about being too confusing with the MCU.
I almost want to see a live action Ramatut Fantastic Four thing. I don't think it's going to happen. If you go back and read that story with Ramatut, it's weird, but that's some of the best comic books. If you want old school 60s comic books, that's what it is.
It also had my favorite panel basically in the Fantastic Four Grand Design where it was Ramatut and his invisible queen, Storm, who he's mind wiped. But
Yes,
it's just her wearing female Pharaoh Queen regalia. Her body's invisible.
it's just
It's just the
invisible. So
regalia. Yeah.
then you've got all the other Fantastic Four made as slaves.
Counterpoint to you, Matt, I just want a good animated Fantastic Four cartoon, which arguably there's never been. So when's a better time to do it than the 2020s?
I don't know, Bob. That 90s cartoon did adapt a lot of the stories that we did read from
But it
Jack
didn't do
Kirby.
it well.
I did want to highlight, though, that Bao is actually voiced by Michael Dorn.
Which I caught, but the only reason I probably caught it is I was looking online as I was assembling the notes while watching these episodes, and people pointed out that Gates McFadden did the voice of Mother Ascani. And putting that in the spot the Star Trek Next Generation actor, that put me in the mindset to catch Michael Dorn his
Yeah.
role.
It's going back to the 90s again. Remember, we used to catch Marina Sirtis and Jonathan Frakes on the Gargoyles and all these other shows.
Yeah.
We're doing the same thing in
So
2026.
there's so many others. Kate Mulgrew and Brent Spiner did voices for Gargoyles. A lot of Star Trek
Oh,
actors
yeah,
did
yeah.
voice
So
on
we're just going to continue that whole tradition all the way to 2026. All right. Another thing I want to point out, too, is that in the past, Xavier has a motorized ancient wheelchair. It's not just a wheelchair, it has a joystick.
Hey man, Beast was stressed that he couldn't get the time travel machine built, and he had to decompress and work on the wheelchair character in this episode.
My favorite character was Nightcrawler because at one point he comes out and Professor X asks, "Did anyone see you?" And he goes, "Not a soul saw me. Although in ancient Egypt of murderous robots, I would imagine a demon lurking among them would hardly come as a surprise." Which is true. Look at Ivan Sur here. Look at the way he looks. No one's gonna blink an eye at Nightcrawler.
Yeah, that was a funny line. My character of the episode is Magneto. I particularly love the irony that Xavier is worried that Magneto is going to betray him, but Magneto is trying to protect Xavier's dream by converting young Apocalypse to Xavier's dream 5,000 years in the past, even though Xavier doesn't want him to do that. The layers of that I thought were pretty amusing.
I really like where the story is going, and that we're implying that Magneto is causing apocalypse.
Although I couldn't tell if the end of this meant that the timeline was going to be worse or if it just meant that the timeline was going to be broadly the same as it ever was. That's maybe a little ambiguous at this point.
It was ambiguous, and that's why I'm excited for the next episode because I want to see what repercussions this has.
All right. Join us next week, listeners, for that. Before we let go, I wanted to double check. I'm right in assuming that episode 2 was both of our favorite episode for this out of these three, Matt. I'm right in assuming that.
Oh yeah, for sure. If I had to rank them, episode 2, 1, 3, probably. I think they did a really good job with the Cyclops Jean Grey thing because I just remember as a child hating that story, and here I was able to actually enjoy it. So thank you.
Yeah, I think you were wrong necessarily to hate it as a kid.
I like the third episode as well.
I was wondering why they were doing 3 episodes to start with, but having watched these, it makes a lot of sense why they did these 3 to start with, both because you get the cliffhanger going into episode 4, but also because, like we were saying, one is set in the far future, one is set in the present, but with totally different characters, and one is set in the far past. So it makes sense to give you all 3 of these episodes so people get like the synoptic catch up of, okay, where are the X-Men after the season, right?
It's so hard sometimes to remember, okay, what happened in 97 and what happened in the comic book, the main line, what happened in some other story we read 40 years ago. So, so I appreciate them doing that.
All right, listeners, join us again as we check in on episode 4 of X-Men 97 Season 2. I'm Bob in Cascadia. That's Matt in the software, and have a great night, everybody.
Thanks for listening.